in the month of May in Minnesota. It's Welcome to George Shearing, and it's good to see you again.
Leigh, it's very nice to be back with you again. We seem to meet sometimes after even years of absence, and it's sort of like we never left. I guess that's what old friends are about, isn't it?
It certainly is, and I value that so much. It's good to see you, and I got to thinking in terms of time, and then this sporadic meeting, through the years. Going back to your first trips and initiation to the transitions in jazz that were occurring around Minton's in Harlem. You made some journeys to Harlem and to Minton's, and you certainly must have had an experience and a half.
It was so exciting. I remember one night I was up there with a group of people, and I mean, it could be anybody from Dizzy to Bird, and I met people like Big Sid Catlett there and sat in with him, and I was so excited one night that I started a furious perspiration business all over the body, and I really thought I was going to pass out from just being kind of so spiritually carried away by it all. And of course, I was at the very impressionable age of 28 years, and while most of us have gone through a lot of our impressionable period by that time, you've got to remember that I was sort of a born-again musician, because it had been a dream of mine to come to the United States ever since I was a teenager, ever since I played with the All Blind Band in England, and we played Jimmy Lunsford arrangements. One of my great regrets is that all the things that I've seen over here and all the people that I've sat in with, Charlie Parker and Coleman Hawkins and Charlie Shavers and Kirby, and played the show for Ella Fitzgerald when Hank Jones had his night off in the Three Deuces, got somebody to play my intermission job, and even had this kind of elbow room as a little-known English musician who came over here with very little more ability than the ability to play in the styles of Art Tatum and Teddy Wilson and Fats Waller. And while one doesn't degrade that kind of ability, it is secondary in nature. Why do they want the English equivalent when they could have the American original? So you can imagine when I got to Minton's in Minton's Playhouse in Harlem, which, as you remember, was owned or run by Teddy Hill. You can imagine the tremendous excitement and the born-again English musician syndrome, It was just incredible. I mean, you just saying that brings back a whole period of excitement. And Big Sid Catlett, as big as he was and as light as he could play, and instead of asking Charlie Parker, "What would you like to play, Mr. Parker?" I became an American bop musician, and all that implies, by saying, "What do you want to blow, Bird?" And I suppose he felt that this little English upstart, and he was a gentleman as far as I was concerned, a very gentle man, who would come to me in the intermission at Three Deuces and say, "Do you want to go out for a walk?" Take me for a walk round the block. Never sound on me for a penny. Never faced me with any of his drug problems or anything. But I still feel that he thought it was good for me to put me through the paces. So when I said, "What do you want to blow, Bird?" he said, "Oh, how about all the things you are in B?" Fortunately, I'd had the background. I could do it. And I cut the mustard, I guess, But I deserved it. If that's what he was doing to me, I deserved it. Have you served your apprenticeship or haven't you?
Oh, what marvelous memories. May I also just touch for a moment on the band that you played with in England, and you were playing those Jimmy Lunceford arrangements. I, too, in the United States, as a young man, was exposed to Jimmy Lunceford, and you and I have never had a chance to talk about the Lunceford Band, but to me, when I hear Chopin's Prelude or What's Your Story, Morning Glory, or Swinging on C, oh, this was a very special mark in musical style.
And what a show band it was. The whole section would stand up and play those shout choruses, just so marvelous. I really regret not seeing that band in person, but the records are with us to remember, and there's been great re-releases. Some French company re-released about 5 LPs in a box. I don't know whether you got a hold of that set or not, but it's just marvelous. I got it. I bought it, but I did get it. Of course, now I'm a disc jockey. I need it, you know.
Let's talk about that for a moment, George. You're a part of a coterie of musicians, which include Benny Goodman and Duke Ellington, Teddy Wilson, Marion McPartland, Billy Taylor.
Billy Taylor was on WNEW for about 2 years one time.
Yes, and all of these musicians did their stint on WNEW, and you have a Sunday night program that runs 2 hours. You really, I suppose, have, along with your love for the language, both in the sense of the singer's artistry as well as the spoken word, are adventuring in new territory?
Yes, and very happily so, because, you know, it's probably the most impractical wish I've ever had in my life. But I'd rather be a disc jockey than perform.
That indeed is surprising.
Can you believe that?
Well, you tell me about it.
Yeah.
I do believe it.
Well, because, you know, I've performed for, well, you know, if you can call it performing. My first job is in a pub when I was 16 years of age. This next birthday in August is going to be my 66th. So that means I've been performing for 50 years. It's a long time. And I was a disc jockey in 63 on KNX in Los Angeles for about a year, 10 months to be precise. And I've been doing this on WNEW since the 24th of February. So that's how much of a neophyte I am in terms of being a disc jockey. I'm learning all the time about how rapidly one needs to speak, or how precisely you keep the voice up, and this, that, and the other thing. And my best critic is my dear wife Ellie, who often will accompany me to the station and offer these words of wisdom about the voice, and put pertinent information from the liner notes onto a micro cassette, and I copy them down in Braille and take the notes to the studio with me and read them between records.
Does the music itself, it certainly must inspire the narrative as you go along and set your program?
Yeah, it does. It inspires improvisation in the narrative, because while I have a lot of stuff written, I may have gathered some stuff in my head hearing the record, and I'll go off on another tangent and not read what's written and save what's written for another time.
Thematically, you and I were talking, you developed some rather interesting approaches to programming, which, you know, is got to be the meat and heart of your knowledge, as well as your compositions and your performances and your improvisation.
Well, you know, instead of playing a record by Machito and a record by Brazil 66 or something, and leave people say, well, that's nice, the rhythm is great, I try to pursue some of the derivation of such rhythms. And I have these little segments that last maybe 15 or 20 minutes on the show. And one of them was tracing the Afro-Cuban rhythms back to the bush. I started by playing some Watusi tribe recordings, where there's a leader and a group, and the leader sings a few bars of I assume either improvised or preset solo, and answered by a whole group in unison of definitely preset answer to the solo. And then I play a Machito where perhaps Machito will sing and a trio or quartet of singers will riff or do certain things behind. And in both cases, you have the leader and the group, and question and answer in vocal. And in both cases, you have conga drums and cowbells of one kind or another. And by this means, you can point out certain similarities between the earliest and most remote recordings of people in the bush and recordings of Machito that we know today and that perhaps were done 10 or 15 years ago.
Fascinating. Last night I had an opportunity to hear George Russell and his organization perform the African game.
Gosh, I was so sorry I couldn't hear that. Because we were rehearsing for the thing, for the Shakespeare. Was it a big band?
It was a big band, and he went back to the bush and took us all the way up through the 1980s, and something for you to explore in some future listening session and programming session. And speaking of that rehearsal that you were involved with while George Russell was performing Crosstown at the Walker, you are finally, I suppose, beginning to really reach a point of how can I describe it?
Indulging myself in personal likes and dislikes in the music business?
Well, your love of vocal music, which I discovered one night years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And William Shakespeare, you, and those wonderful sonnets of his.
Well, of course, Dale Wallen Singers and I, on the 25th, are doing this. And it's called Music to Hear, which of course is the name of one of the sonnets. And I suppose being a literate man that you are, know the one it is. Music to hear, why hearest thou music sadly, sweets with sweets worn not, joy delights in joy. Why lovest thou that which thou receivest not gladly, or received with pleasure thine annoy? Wonderful, wonderful literate writing, and lets itself be set to music with such ease. And if you can, imagine the Elizabethan sounds that should go behind that.
What have you designed for that particular theme?
Well, a rather majestic, somewhat very English, very, very, very English sound, There was an English hymn called Jerusalem. And did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green? And this kind of majestic but very English. So mine is music to hear, why hearest thou music sadly? Sweets with sweets worn not, joy delights in joy, that kind of business. So it's very English. And then there are other parts of it which are Elizabethan. And there are other parts which are, believe it or not, Leigh, which really demand the same kind of vocal attention that the LA voices give. Are you familiar? You must be familiar with the LA voices, aren't you? Well, I've got one part in there which, I was inspired to write it that hi-ho, sing hi-ho, unto the green holly, with all the harmony changing chromatically, and very much akin to the LA voice. I'm going to send them a copy of this and see if they want to do something with it.
Should be a real piece of material for them. There's one other ballad in there. Did you I think I noticed that you had done music for Shall I Compare the...
Yes. Well, the sonnets I used were music to hear, and then shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art no, I'm more temperate, and I can't remember, but that one, and is it for fear to wed a widow's eye? They're the three sonnets, and then the two songs, Blow, Blow, Thou Winter Winds, and Sigh No More, Ladies.
Well, of course, John Dankworth and Cleo Lane have had their innings, and Duke Ellington, too, in this area. This is certainly, however, a rather new and fresh approach.
Yes, well, it's when I feel it best treated in the Elizabethan period, I try so to do. And when I feel it can stand a slightly more modern treatment, or even a treatment of the ballad of the 30s. Sigh No More Ladies might have been written by Noel Coward or Cole Porter, the way I treat it. Sigh no more, ladies, sigh no more. Men were deceivers ever. One foot in sea and one on shore. Constant to one thing, never, that kind of business. So it might have been written by any one of the 30 or 40s type American composer.
Well, some few decades ago, I did discover that you liked to sing and enjoyed it so much. Watching you at a keyboard one night, and I welcome so much hearing you sing now, and I wonder, as you sat back in England prior to World War II and during the war years, who were the singers in the American idiom that impressed you?
Well, who could have missed the golden years of Frank Sinatra with Axel Stordahl and with Nelson Riddle and Nat Cole at the same time with his marvelous sound, and Julie LaRosa been doing some wonderful things at that, a little later in that period, but not much. Early Jack Jones, of course, I love. And Steve Lawrence.
And then there was a man by the name of Mel Torme.
Well, I almost tend to leave out Mel for one reason. That Mel and I have worked together for about 9 years, off and on. And if I didn't like him, I couldn't work with him that long. I happen to think Mel Torme is the best in the business because, for one thing, he is so multi-talented. He is a fine arranger, a good drummer. He plays piano. He's not my favorite pianist, but I'm not his favorite singer either. So, we share that bone of contention in common, I guess. And a highly intelligent man. I mean, written books and, appeared in movies and written definitive books about Judy Garland. And, he's into so many things. It's incredible.
If we talk about lyrics and music, let's talk about the message for a moment. What intrigues you and draws you to the message, the lyric, what catches your ear, whether you write it or the other spirit out there writes it, the other music?
I'm not sure that I'm even capable of writing a lyric, but I am very sure, and sometimes even a little egotistical about understanding a lyric. A very fine lyricist and composer as well is the unsung, underrated, and little heard Charles de Forest. I have no piano. I cannot display the full extent of Charles de Forest. I've sung enough to be on 3 shows, and so I'll recite what I consider to be one of Charles' very best lyrics. It's a tune called What's Happened to Spring. And he says, Old Man Snowman has gone to nature, and all other such nomenclature for winter siege bows before its liege, it's spring at last. So the almanac advertises it, so the calendar verifies it. Ah, but alas, things have reached a pretty pass. What's happened to spring? It's not at all like spring. Today I heard a robin song, and I detected something wrong, some note of blue that doesn't belong to spring. What's happened to spring? What's wrong with this year's spring? Some children playing in a game seem wistful now and strangely tame, and really not at all the same this spring. Look, the night is just a night, the moon a most indifferent white. Everything is topsy-turvy, and if my good senses serve me, you are blamed. Aren't you ashamed? What's happened to spring? Just take a look at spring. No country green is busy mustering, and the sun is filibustering, and the wind is boldly blustering like a winter thing. Why, little one, look what you've done to spring. Old Man Cricket fails to squeak, and Lady May has turned her cheek, and Mr. Bear's still hibernating, and the fish are not for baiting. What is it? There's no hope for this poor dope. What's happened to spring? No ribbon kites on wing. The woods aren't sprucing up a bit. My gosh, it's surely time for it. And Junior just can't make a hit in Little Miss Pigtail's fling. Why, little one, look what you've done to spring.
George Shearing, thank you for those memories of Charles de Forest and his intimate performances, piano and voice, on the east side of New York, in some shadowy circumstance, in some saloon.
Incredible.